Can George Floyd's family win the $250 million lawsuit against Kanye? George Floyd's young daughter, her mother, and their legal team are preparing to wage legal war against Kanye West. They have announced that they'll be suing him for $250 million after his recent comments on Floyd's death. Roxy Washington, the mother of Floyd's only daughter Gianna, has said that she's hired a team of lawyers to go after Ye, his business partners, and his associates for misinformation, misappropriation, defamation, and infliction of emotional distress. The family's attorneys also say they fired off a cease and desist letter to him over his comments about Floyd's fatal interaction with Minneapolis police. The letter reads, "Mr. Floyd's cause of death is well settled through evidence presented in courts of law during the criminal and civil trials that were the result of his untimely and horrific death. Nevertheless, you have maliciously made statements that are inaccurate and unfounded, causing damage to Mr. Floyd's estate and his family." Kanye's taken a ton of heat for his comments that he made on an episode of Drink Champs, claiming that George died from a narcotics overdose and pre-existing conditions instead of Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck. He said, "I watched the George Floyd documentary that Candace Owens put out. One of the things that his two roommates said was that they want a tall guy like me, and the day that he died, he said a prayer for 8 minutes. If you look, the guy's knee wasn't even on his neck like that." He then went on to suggest that George had taken a powerful narcotic, and that's what actually caused his death, which is a conspiracy theory that's already been debunked in court. A jury has agreed that Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck according to his trial testimony by the medical examiner who performed his autopsy, and concluded that his death was a direct result of his subdual, restraint, and neck compression. So to suggest anything else is clearly misinformation. The Floyd family says Kanye's statements are blatantly false and malicious, and they say that Gianna is being re-traumatized by his comments, which they say are creating an unsafe and unhealthy environment for her. In the cease and desist, the family's lawyers demand that the rapper removes the interview from the internet, along with all of his similar statements about George Floyd, and not mention his name again. According to Lee Merritt, the family's attorney, they are pursuing something called intentional infliction of emotional distress. Merritt has said that while a defamation lawsuit isn't possible because George is deceased, the lawsuit would be for emotional distress on behalf of the George Floyd Foundation or the family members themselves. In fact, just recently the Sandy Hook families were able to successfully sue Alex Jones, all for defamation because he called the parents of the victims actors. A jury awarded the victims' families a combined total of $956 million. In Kanye's case, he didn't say anything about George's family members, but his comments on the podcast could still have a negative impact on them. The bigger point here though is that Kanye needs to understand that statements like the ones he's putting out in the world are false and hurtful. Merritt went on to say that that type of rhetoric undermines the Floyd's family's efforts to pass legislation, like the George Floyd Policing Act, to help stop police brutality. He also says it deflects blame from the officers who've been convicted in connection to his murder, especially Derek Chauvin. In terms of the lawsuit, there's no doubt that $250 million would sufficiently hurt Kanye's wallet, considering his estimated net worth of $2 billion. The family's legal team also plans to look into Candace Owens' documentary to see if there's any basis to bring legal action against her as well. The controversial right-wing documentary called The Greatest Lie Ever Sold, George Floyd and the Rise of BLM, rehashed the conspiracy theory surrounding his death and criticized the entire social movement following it. Candace essentially believes that the founders of BLM used the 2020 protests to make millions of dollars in donations and had no real intention of putting it towards the cause. The whole concept of her documentary is an investigation into who has the money and where it was spent, which as a standalone idea is already extremely contentious. So it's entirely possible that Floyd's legal team will find something damaging within her documentary. Do you think they'll win the lawsuit? Let me know in the comments below and I'll catch you in the next video.